How to deal with the experience required paradox for those entering the information security field. Hello and welcome to the Exploring Information Security podcast, where you will learn, explore, and grow your security mindset. I am your host, Timothy D. Block, and in this episode, we will be exploring how to deal with the experience required paradox for those entering information security. And with me today to do that is Jerry Bell of the Defensive Security Podcast. Jerry, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on.
So let's get to the topic at large here. How do you deal with experience required paradox that we see on so many security job postings?
You know, that's been an interesting question, and I've been asked that quite a lot lately, and that was in fact what wrote me to write something up about this. And so I think in many respects it's dependent on your particular situation. And so what I found is that there are a couple of different kinds of people who are asking these questions of me, at least. And I would say by far the most common is people who are in other kinds of IT roles, specifically help desk or desk side support, or maybe even some kind of system administration type of role. And I think depending on where you're coming at it from, the barrier to entry and that experience required obstacle is going to look a little different. So, for instance, there are some who are coming at it from an entirely different field, like manufacturing or who knows, law or what have you. And if you are coming at it from that perspective, you really are going to have I think a challenge in drawing parallels between your particular experience and maybe the kinds of roles that you want to have. One of the things that I think just kind of start out of the gate with is I see quite oftentimes people targeting too high a level of a job as a start, right? And so you may be in an IT type of role, and obviously right now information security is the hot place to be, and we all want to. Everybody wants to get into that game. And so we'll go start looking at job posts that look really interesting. And the one really common, I'll say tactical mistake is trying to setting your sights too high at the beginning, right? And so one of the things I would say, having now thought about this quite a lot and giving some guidance to people, is making sure that you really have a practical expectation for what you're going after. And so just to make that real, I've had quite a few people send me job descriptions, and it'll be let's say a senior level architect, and it requires six to 10 years of experience, and they'll ask, well, Jerry, how do I close that loop? I don't have the experience, so I can't get the job to get the experience. And I think that's in a way the wrong way to think about it, right? Because if you're coming into this field new, you're probably going to need to aim a little more at a maybe not entry level, but closer to entry level. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was going to be my question is are you seeing a lot of these on like entry level positions, or is it mostly, people are just shooting too high?
I will tell you, almost everyone, I can't really think of any exceptions off the top of my head. Almost everyone has come at it shooting too high. Okay. And so I think it's a very common issue that drives this particular question. You see this very large requirement for experience, and I don't have that experience. How am I going to get the experience to get the job? And the thing that I've started, the metaphor I've tried to start explaining is, you can't go into a company and apply for the CFO job or
Oh,
the controller. You
well,
can't actually
yeah,
can't apply, right?
right. Absolutely, but you might just not get that call.
Yeah, and the point is that just like even though it is well said that information security has negative unemployment, meaning that there are more jobs than people,
Mhm.
there's still a requirement that the
Right.
people they are hiring have the skills that they need. And so just like in the CFO or the finance metaphor, a company isn't going to hire someone who was a security person to come and be their controller. That's not how it happens. If that's your career path, you kind of need to map out from where you're at to where you want to be. So
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the fundamental tenets to understand, at least from my experience.
Yeah, well, and drawing on my experience, like you were saying, you don't necessarily have to shoot for entry level, but like mid level, you can, especially if you've worked in IT, you've almost had to have dealt with security in some aspects. And I've gone back through my resume, even to my time in the Navy, and I was given an award for doing patches and security updates and stuff. But that was like security wasn't my main role. But you can pull like little things out of just general IT work.
Absolutely. And one of the things I said in the thing I wrote here is that almost any IT job you can imagine is going to have some parallel that you can draw. And so one of the things that we have to be cognizant of when we're applying for a job is it's like a sales deal. You need to convince or at least convey how your previous experiences are applicable and inform your ability to do the job that you're applying for. And so, to your point, you may not have done that particular thing before, but you have been responsible for patches, or you were a developer that had to look for bugs or look for either in your code or in someone else's code. And so look through those previous experiences, again, particularly if you're in IT. I think that's a great thing that you need to do. And you know that kind of goes along with the whole concept of most of everything we're going to talk about tonight is building your brand, right? You need to
Mm-hmm.
think of yourself as a brand, and your previous experiences are some of the features of your brand, and you need to figure out how to build a message around those experiences that are strategically aligned with where you want to go.
Okay. So how do you build your brand, or what are some of the things that you can do to build your brand?
Well, so there's quite a lot of opportunities, and I solicited some input from the community and got a lot of good ideas. There's a couple of really obvious ones, like blogging. So I think lots of security people are prolific bloggers, including me.
Mm-hmm.
Podcasts. Running a podcast is I know it's a silly thing, right? But
Right.
it's materially contributing to the betterment of the industry, hopefully, and you're kind of establishing yourself as a somewhat of an authority, right? And so it's yet again another thing that you can list off. I have a security blog, I have a security podcast, or those sorts of things. There's, I think, a few others. Volunteering at security conferences.
Right.
So there's, depending on where you live, right? There's usually some form of a security conference going on. Either it's ISSA or OWASP or the B-sides.
Mm-hmm.
There's quite a lot of different possibilities, and if you volunteer for those, either to work it or to speak at one and present, those go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest benefits out of those is that it's an easy way to allow you to get into networking within the security community.
Exactly. That's a really important point. I think to touch on is that a lot of, and this has certainly been true for me from a personal perspective, and I've seen it happen many times in acquaintances and friends. The the sought after jobs are not often filled by job postings on Monster.com or Glassdoor.com or what have you, right? They're
Right.
filled by the people who are attending the local ISSA chapter meeting or the
Hmm.
B-Sides event. Networking is so critically important, and it, by the way, is something I don't do very well. So it's pot, kettle, black, all that.
Right. Well, you got a podcast, so I'm sure that helps out with it.
And I'll tell you, um, that is actually one of the main reasons I started the podcast, because I'm an introvert by nature, and so it kind of forced me to be out in the public eye.
Hmm.
So, and I think that's an important thing for people looking to get into the industry, is kind of look internally and identify things like that might be self-governing, and look for ways to kind of offset that. So like for me, it was starting the podcast, and that kind of forces me to be out there
Hmm.
in the public. So I think that's good. I mentioned a little bit, but giving talks
Hmm.
is a phenomenal way to build your brand, to establish a reputation, and also to just better yourself, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely.
So the process of conceiving up a topic, you know, gathering support from your ISSA chapter or
Hmm.
a B-Sides event, that's very important. The research and presentation development is very important. The experience with presenting, just presenting, is a huge, that's a very, very powerful thing.
Right. Well, and I'll say like a lot of these sexy consulting gigs that you hear about in InfoSec are going to require some sort of presentation skill, and speaking skill too.
Oh, absolutely. And writing.
Right. Yep.
I think that is, it's probably one of the, unfortunately, one of the least talked about aspects.
Hmm.
If you're a pen tester, everybody wants to be in offensive security right now. Pen testing is hot, it's sexy, it's where everybody wants to be. But what a lot of people don't talk about is a huge part of that job is communications. It's writing reports. It's
Hmm.
summarizing things in a way that's consumable by the client. You're not going to just run a bunch of different pen test tools and plunk down the raw output. You have to synthesize that. That's the value that you bring. And I'll also tell you, from a branding perspective, how you write and what you write are the world's interpretation of you before they ever have a chance to meet you.
Right.
So you just keep that in mind.
Yep. Well, and I'll give for new people getting into InfoSec and trying to get I think it'd be good if you can write about some of the InfoSec things, but take a topic. Maybe you have a hobby or something else that you like that you can write about. Like write about that. So before I got into security, I'm a big baseball fan, and I was asked to write for a baseball blog, and that has done wonders for my writing. Not only just personally, but I've had my CIO while working for the security team tell me that he thought my writing was a lot better than some of the other people I worked with. So I think that's just right is just a good way of. It doesn't have to necessarily be InfoSec to improve that skill.
Absolutely. And that's another thing that, by the way, blogging, I think, gives you.
Right.
Is it forces you to refine your writing style. And it gives you kind of a, I won't say a penalty-free place to do that. Your blog ultimately is part of, an extension of your
Right.
presence online. And by the way, I want to expand that thought a little bit and say, keeping in mind, we got more to talk about for sure, but keeping in mind when you apply for a job, and I don't even care if it's not InfoSec, anymore, your prospective employers are looking you up online,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it was a very interesting. I went to my kids are in middle school and high school, and I recently went to a meeting, and actually it was about athletics, and the thing that they harped on the most was your behavior and your appearance in social media.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may be a great person, you may know a ton, you may have worked really hard, but if you come across as as an offensive and insufferable or spoiled person, you're going to have your work cut out for you, because they may not even call you back.
Right. And that all goes back to, like you said, you're branding yourself. So anything you put online is going to be branding yourself. There are times where I've wanted to, say certain things online, but I realize, this is searchable, and this is also undeletable. You just go back and look at, archive.org and several other things. You say something stupid, that's going to get screenshotted and it's going to be on the internet forever.
Oh, you bet, and I think it's a very important thing. And by the way, the flip side is also true. Know going in that your prospective employers are going to be Googling you. They're going to be looking for your blog. They're going to be looking at your Twitter timeline and to the extent they can, your Facebook information to get a sense of what you know. And while it's important not to be inflammatory might not be the right word.
Right.
I'm inflammatory a lot, but you don't want to be excluding yourself just by virtue of what you've written on those forums. But at the same time, you have this is a great opportunity to show a prospective employer what your contribution is. And so I think leveraging those media to help people, to demonstrate that you are knowledgeable and helpful and can get along, play in the sandbox, And so those are some really great things to keep in mind.
Right.
You want, again, from a branding perspective, you want your prospective employers to kind of, however they look at you, to be impressed.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're submitting an application that 100 other people are submitting an application, and they're looking for even the slightest thing to eliminate you from, that massive pile of resumes that they have to go through. So, absolutely.
That's right. Nobody wants a headache. Nobody wants to hire a problem child.
Right.
Well,
Absolutely.
almost no one. I won't say no one. But, so yeah, there's that. Now, it's been interesting because I think when most people ask me these questions, those are the things I harp on, right? But what they're really asking is, what technologies should I learn? How do I get up to speed on this widget? How do I get better? How do I position myself technically to get into these positions? And it's a really interesting kind of I know paradox is an overused term on this podcast right now, but
Right.
it is a bit of a paradox, because most of my recommendations, and many of my recommendations, are actually about things that are maybe not necessarily in line with that. But having said that, I do have some recommendations on those. So again, people are most interested in that, I think, and so I did get some really great input, and probably the first one, and this kind of intersects with it's a nice easy segue into the technology part, is certifications, right?
Mm-hmm.
So certifications not only demonstrate your depending on the certification, your proficiency in a particular domain related to security, whether it's like penetration testing or incident response or something like that. But at the same time, it also goes back to the personal branding, because you are, it's something that you can hold up as as evidence that you are, you know what you're doing, and so if you hang out especially on Twitter and maybe even hear me talk sometimes, there's a lot of dogging on certificates or
Hmm.
certifications,
Right.
especially things like the CISSP or the Certified Ethical Hacker. But the reality is, and by the way, the reason for that is that they're not incredibly hard certifications to get. They have a fairly low barrier of entry. However, most, I'm not going to say all by any stretch of the imagination, but many jobs have, if you look, right, they'll say, CISSP
Hmm.
preferred or
Yep.
required, and I've talked to people in the past about prospective jobs, and I don't have my CISSP, and one of the first things the employer, that the recruiter will ask is, do you have your CISSP? And then the answer is no. Would you be willing to get one? So it's a big deal.
Right.
It at least from the perspective of getting your foot in the door, certifications, I think, have some value.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you keep them in the right context, I think the biggest things for certifications is that they at least give the person some exposure and kind of set I guess you say a standard they have to reach. Yes, it's a test, or some of them, like you said, the CISSP and CEH are kind of mocked a little bit for their lack of toughness, but they do expose people and give, if anything else, it sets like I guess a low, even if it is a low bar to reach, at least people are getting exposed to that. And, from those certifications, you could branch out, and it could be like a starting point for someone to explore.
Absolutely. And I think, by the way, that especially the CISSP is a very broad certification, covers most every dimension of security to
It's like
some
8
level.
domains.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't go deep on anything, but it does a couple of things that are very important. Number one is it forces you to learn the lingo,
Hmm.
which is very important. And the second one is it exposes you to a wide array of different aspects. And so another thing that I come up with, and it's usually one of the first or second questions I ask people when they ask me for help is, what interests you? What you know people aren't, way back when you could have a security person, right? But now you have a pen tester or a firewall admin or a security architect or an identity and access management architect or an incident response person, or
Right.
and kind of understanding you can't be an expert in every one of those domains. It's just not, it's not workable. I It's something I struggle with myself. I'm very interested in many things,
Hmm.
and that you have to kind of focus yourself a little bit. Clearly, you need, in my view, you need a broad understanding of the entire universe of security in order to be effective. But at the end of the day, you're probably going to specialize,
Right.
and starting to figure out what that specialization is going to be early on, and then using that as a way to help build a roadmap from where you're at to where you want to be in that specialization is very important, because that's going to help drive things like a home lab,
Right.
because you're going to need to expose yourself to entirely different things depending on if you want to be a pen tester or if you want to be a security architect. There is certainly some overlap. However, there are practical differences in what you want to focus yourself on.
Okay. Well, so what you're saying is there's a lot of opportunities here to overcome experience required, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will also say, just get involved for those people who are interested in getting into the community, right? Get involved.
Yeah.
Start meeting people, and find a mentor, and again, build your personal roadmap of where you want to go. And there's lots of people out there who are willing to help.
Right. Yeah. And realize that that's going to probably take a little bit of time. You're not just going to instantly start, have a network. It takes a little bit of time to build up. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. Back to your story about volunteering or, starting up the podcast. One of my first experiences was volunteering to take pictures at a B-Sides event in Nashville. And that has actually opened that was actually the starting point for building my network, and has kind of opened other opportunities. And I've met a lot of security professionals just by walking around carrying around a camera and people talking to me about cameras. So it's and not saying you have to do a podcast or camera, but I think find something that you really enjoy doing and see if you can bring that to a security conference or some type of event. I've seen people knitting and doing all sorts of fabricing and just bringing like sewing or anything that you enjoy doing. You can bring that to the security space. There's a lot of creativity within the security community.
So basically non-security creative hobbies, right?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And there are football fans, there are baseball fans, there are all sorts of, and I've actually, through my baseball blogging, I've met a security professional who's the same baseball team fan as I am. So it's just how those things kind of work out, and it can be connected. You don't have to do something hardcore security pen testing all the time to get connected with people.
No, and I think it's at least as important as as the technical aspect, from the perspective of landing a job or landing a position, doing what you want to do, for sure.
Okay. Well, anything else you'd like to mention that we haven't covered?
Circling back to something I kind of started off with, and I didn't complete one of the thoughts that related to actually moving into the field, particularly from other fields. I think one of the things, and this is a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, if you are in a different industry and you want to move over into information security, and I think this is actually the genesis of why people are picking potentially out of their reach, currently out of their reach jobs, is that they've often attained some level of standing in their current line of work, whether that's IT or some other business area, and you're kind of starting over in a lot of cases, right? And having to work your way back up, and so that can be a difficult nut to crack if you're already established and whatnot, and the prospect of going back to a lower level position can be it can be problematic logistically. I mean, not even if you may even want to do it, but it could be just very difficult for you to do personally. Even though I think in many cases the potential for accelerated growth and income are going to be higher on the information security side, it's really ultimately going to be up to the person to figure out what's their tolerance for that kind of thing. And the other thought I wanted to have, or wanted to convey here, is if you are interested in this and take kind of the long view, one of my best recommendations is to look for either consulting companies or look for small companies. Be the IT person, which includes security related duties, and kind of grow from there. That's actually that's how I started off, long time ago, as the IT guy for a very small company. And as the IT guy, you are exposed to everything, right? So, I was the programmer, I was the Unix admin, I was the security person. And when I want to go do something related to security, that's the focus. That what I did there, I focus conveying my experiences on the things that are relevant to security related aspects. So
that's good.
I think that's what I had for you.
Good. Awesome. That's a good point to end on. All right. Well, you can see Jerry Bell's stuff at maliciously.com. You've also got jerrybell.com. You can see him on Twitter at maliciously, and he's got a podcast. So, at Defensive Sec is the Twitter handle.
Thank you very much for having me on.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me to discuss dealing with the experience required paradox.
Absolutely.